Hello and welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Covage, I'm the editor with MySecurity Media. Today we're joined by the Bugcrowd leadership team, Dave, Gerry, the CEO, and Casey Ellis, the CSO, Chief Strategy Officer. Gents, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us.
And wonderful to be here in Singapore. Last time we spoke, Casey, was early this year in Sydney.
That's right.
And Dave, last time also in Sydney. Last year in San Francisco.
We seem to have great views everywhere we go.
Always. That's why I've grabbed us to the side. If, just
it.
for the audience, there's a nice view outside. But for the lighting, we've got you here. AI bias, you've just released, and then also back of the news, Bugcrowd's been approved for pen testing here in Singapore. So well done to hitting the region.
Thank you.
And the hub of Asia Pacific.
Yeah, no, we couldn't be more excited. So we've spent the last 12 plus months really in the region, building relationships with customers and with partners in the region, with hackers and members of the community. So we're so excited to be here in full force. So we obviously have a lot of our team here this week. We're hiring more and more people in the region. And as you talked about, we now have our license to be able to do pen testing here in the region. And it's something that our customers have been asking for, right? So they've been able to leverage bug bounty. They've been able to leverage vulnerability disclosure. And now they're excited to be able to do pen testing. And now with our new AI bias offering, which I'll let Casey get into here, it's just one more additional service that they can leverage and really tap into the members of the community and the hacker community to be able to get value.
I think maybe one more on the Singapore sort of aspect of that, how you find that that's going to change your profile in the region. Is it something that you, in the research, you're going to have to do by country, or do you find that this sort of just opens up those doors for sort of Southeast Asia as an example?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So it varies by country for sure.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is the hub, as you talked about, the hub of the APAC region for us, and that was a core reason that we knew we needed to go through this process. And pen testing has been, over the past 12 months, our fastest growing product, and this has been our fastest growing region. So now you pair those up, we're excited for what's going to come in 2024 when we now have the ability to come into the market with the full arsenal of offerings that we have.
Well, I'm sure it opens up to the ASEAN sort of partners, those 10 countries. I'm sure that it sort of opens up or triggers sort of the compliance aspect in all of those.
I like the fact that, I mean, we've partly the hometown advantage and the number of Australian accents kicking around the company, and the size of the team. We've always had quite a well-established presence in Australia and New Zealand, and we've definitely seen that ramp up quite significantly since really 2020 was when that started to kick off. What I love about the announcement is just basically signaling intent. It's like, no, we're doubling down. We've already been doing quite a bit of work in the region, but this is us doubling down on that in a way that's that's required some investment from us to get it done. But also signals to the market that we're here, we're serious.
I think it also signals to me is how much of a challenge it is to run a cybersecurity business. So if you have to, just another hoop, right? You've done everything you needed to do in Australia, headed over to the US, grown, you've got a good presence in Europe, and it's like, okay, you still have to go through all the hoops here in the region, and it's a challenge in its own right. Again, but it signals to the market that you can do it, that you've got those skills
and that we're serious. We're committed.
Yeah.
We're locked into doing it. It's not just an idea that we're talking about. We're actually doubling down on it in a material way.
Anyone who's been following our interviews as we've been going, you're one to watch. So this is just another indicator. Casey, this is your first time to Singapore, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Quite exciting. Again, another signal to the market.
Well, it's. I mean, I've been telling people that, and I think the general reaction's been shock because
it's like an Australian saying,
Australian security person.
I haven't been to Bali
Singapore.
before.
It's like, what? But for some reason, I've actually never put boots down here before. It's great to be here. It's obviously great to be here with WhiteHat Asia, but just checking out the region, being able to talk to folk from Southeast Asia and all of the different countries at the same time, and just build my own point of view on different aspects of the security challenges that are in the region. That's been. I mean, I've been here for like 24 hours at this point. That's already been pretty valuable.
Right. And all your customers will be here anyway, particularly your multinationals will all have an office here, and the conversation's much the same. Let's get on to AI bias. This is a really interesting one, and it might well take you out of the security domain somewhat into other parts of business and how enterprise operates. But how would you summarise it?
Well, I think What you said is exactly right. I think it's showing the extensibility and the capability that exists within this hacker community, right? We always talk about the ingenuity of the crowd. I mean, this truly is the ingenuity of the crowd, where we can start to think about security more broadly to encompass safety, right? And that's the core issue and focus here is how do we help organizations as they look to deploy, whether it's their own homegrown model, whether it's leveraging one of the commercial models, whether it's just tapping into an AI environment, how do we help them understand what security vulnerabilities exist, right? We've been doing that for years. But now it's, okay, how do we actually help them understand the safety and potential implication of bias that could exist within those environments? And this is something that we've been running as a program now, right? So we've been running it with the CDAO. We have experience doing this. We have a crowd within the Bugcrowd community that's capable of delivering this. And now it's, how do we start to expand this out to the rest of our commercial clients? And we're getting a lot of interest, right? This is something that was not us trying to push this out to the market. This was customers saying, hey, we saw this announcement that was released by another customer. We want access to that. How do we get access to that? And this is just the start, right? This is just the first of many AI products and solutions that are going to be coming out from Bugcrowd here over the course of the next quarter or two. So we're excited to get this one to market. Obviously, you want to jump in and kind of talk a little bit about kind of what it is, how it works, all that?
I was going to say, how does it work?
I'm just going to touch on the overall space briefly as well, because super excited to be announcing this product, and there's intent to grow that. There's other things that we've been working on, like this is the first that we're announcing, but there's more in the hopper to address this overall space of AI security and AI safety, which is emergent. But the other thing I would say is that Bugcrowd's been working with the primary foundational LLMs for pretty much the entire time that we've been having this conversation publicly. We've been working with the White House on development of policy, so the Biden executive order around AI, we're a part of writing that, having an impact and an influence in really how this whole kind of domain gets defined going forward. Because I actually don't see it as like distinct from security. I think what's like safety and security have always been conjoined twins. It's just that like AI kind of makes that obvious, right? So now the question is, how do we define that, put scope around the problems that we're trying to solve, and then deliver solutions into them? For us, that's how do we deploy the crowd into that? So that's what we've been working on now for the better part of 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's driving from pure play security to security intelligence, right? It's how do we start to make our customers 100%. Smarter, to surface proactively issues that directly affect their business. So often security is looked at as a cost center. Well, the reality is that it's going to start to switch to a revenue generating part of the organization as you start to deploy these models and you start to deploy these services. If organizations don't have an AI strategy, which includes fundamentally security, safety, and other components of just the usability of the platform, they're going to be left in the dust, right? So these chief security officers and heads of security are becoming more and more aware that they need to have a strategy around, again, finding vulnerability, that's great. Finding an underlying flaw in the model that your company is about to deploy makes you a hero in that organization.
How transferable do you think it's going to be? And maybe just define what it's actually doing.
I was going to go back to that question, but
from the user's perspective, not the end user, but the user in terms of on your platform.
So I'll answer the second question first, and then come back to the transferable piece. Essentially, what we're doing is we've created a model on top of the data that we have on the crowd and our ability to match folks that are skilled in this area with different problems that need to be solved when it comes to AI bias assessment. We've created different contest models where we can basically deploy the crowd into identifying bias that needs to be either retrained on, the model card needs to be updated, or there needs to be a mitigation put in place, depending on what's found. Like that's really the essence of how this works and what it does. The reason that we've started there is that AI bias, I think, was really a lot of what kicked off the conversation around this convergence between security and safety around AI in the first place. There was AI systems being deployed into HR environments that started to exhibit signs of bias. All of a sudden, everyone kind of freaked out about that, and there was a whole bunch of legislation that got kind of kicked off in New York and has since filtered out across the globe pretty much since that point in time. So it's sort of patient zero in terms of problems that need to be solved when it comes to deploying generative AI. So that's why we started with this one, but that's essentially how it works. It's like, how can we identify bias within LLMs or the application of an LLM within an environment that might be undeclared, undisclosed, unknown.
So if I get it right, a customer will say, look, we're using an AI model with this data set, and then we come to you as sort of offer a bounty to say, okay, is there bias and identify bias within that? Is that about
There's a little
right?
more to it than that, but
Yes,
that's
it's
that's the Cliff Notes version, yeah.
Got it. And how would they go about doing that? Is that something they have to hunt down themselves? Is they put in bias? I'm just trying to think of how they attack it.
Essentially, I think there's a lot of aspects of it that look quite similar to social engineering. So it's essentially prompt engineering within the rules of the program itself, because bias is going to mean a different thing to every organization that's running a different program.
Sometimes that bias doesn't come out until later, right, in terms of the size of the data
and
set.
sometimes bias is more relevant in a certain area compared to a different one, like depending on the app, depending on lots of different things. So like working with the customer to figure out what is important, like what's a bad day?
Yes.
Like let's start with that and make sure that there's most of our focus being applied at the top of the heap, and then work our way back down so that we can learn as much as we can in the process. That's really how it works.
You referred to the executive order from the Biden administration, the recent legislation that's come through in Europe. Good for business or consistent, or do you think it's just part of the... how do you fit in that?
It's giving us a lot to talk about.
Yes.
Right.
Do you think it's going to trigger the use of your services? That's what I'm kind of going to, is that companies... It's on their radar that they have to be both ethical, and they need to know that there's compliance regimes coming through, and that legislatively it's not going to be accepted if there are biases in their systems.
I think the spirit of the underlying legislation is correct, right? They want to drive safety. They want to drive transparency to users. We're seeing this not just on the AI side, right? We're seeing this with the SEC guidelines around breach reporting, right? I mean, there's a lot of regulatory action that's happening in and around the cyber landscape today. So I think the spirit of that is positive. I think where some of the challenges start to come is, in some cases, the vagueness of what is required, what's not required. It ends up creating more questions than it answers. And it's going to make it hard from an implementation standpoint to drive the right outcomes that a customer cares about, right? Because fundamentally our customers, and we've seen this across every major market, every major segment, they want to do the right thing. They want to have the right levels of safety built into these models. Oftentimes they don't even know what they don't know in terms of what this thing is capable of doing. So they fundamentally want to do the right thing, and they're struggling to understand what is that right thing. And that's where folks like Bugcrowd come in, where we can help guide them down the path of, these are the types of things you should be looking for. These are the types of outcomes that you may want to see, and we'll actually coach them through the process, just like we do on the security vulnerability side. We'll coach them in the process of, this is what a proper brief looks like. This is what a bias bug is worth, right? Casey, you talk about what is a bug worth. What's a bias bug worth?
Good question, though.
Right?
That was another one I had in the back of my mind. But well, I suppose my point is, as legislation comes through, it's a bit like what we've seen over cybersecurity over the last 12 years since you've started. Is it just it brings it up to the top of companies can't ignore it. They know it's there. They know it's a problem. They have to deal with it. And now there's services available and coming online that can help.
I think the thing that's been a little bit unique, because in many ways the kind of the way that generative AI dropped itself on the collective consciousness of the internet is no different to other emergent technologies that we've worked on over the past 12 years, right? Like connected vehicles, for example, weren't on people's minds as a thing you need to secure until they were.
Yes.
And then boom, off it went from there. We're kind of used to that. The thing that's, I think, a little bit unique about AI is that it's so accessible inherently that it's kind of captured the imagination of everyone all at once, which makes it an issue of retail politics pretty much immediately, which is why you've seen all these legislators scramble to try to write, rules around how this stuff should work. It's because they're being held to account on that. So going back to your question, is it good for business? I think, for us, it's an opportunity for thought leadership and to actually guide that stuff, in the same way that we have with VDP over the years, in the same way that we've given input to stuff like SEC regulations and so on. And that's partly because we want to educate, but it's also partly because we've got the expertise to actually help policymakers do that well. And they kind of want to hear from that. And then downstream, it creates opportunities like the one that we've just announced today.
Do you
Because
have
red teaming is a part of the requirements that are starting to pop out. This whole idea of like, how do we mandate transparency? If you're going to use one of these systems, you have to red team it. There has to be some sort of adversarial testing process that's external so that people can feel comfortable. That's a pretty common theme that's popping out, which creates opportunity for us.
And you've been working on it for a while. Do you have sort of some early wins that you would say, okay, here's one we found, and this is a great example? Or is it a situation where you don't yet know what you're going to be uncovering in terms of some of the AI models that are out there? Do you have any good examples of what you might be picking up?
None that I can share,
unfortunately. Well, that's not fun at all.
It's I mean, honestly.
Then how do you rate a buy? Is it rated? How do you define it?
Yeah, so I was going to go back to that because the way that we've started to talk, or the way that we've been talking about AI safety and security, is AI as a tool, AI as a target, and AI as a threat. So AI as a tool is basically the use of AI to do hacking things in general. AI as a threat is the integration of AI into existing systems and the unintended consequences that can come from that. And then AI as a target is kind of what we're talking about here, where it's like, let's test the systems themselves and see if there's any inherent insecurity or safety issue. A lot of the cool stories have come out of the second category that are shareable in terms of integration points, prompt injection, things that have triggered other issues downstream. And we started seeing quite a bit of that when we started working with OpenAI, Anthropic, those folk, to the point where we actually released an update to our vulnerability rating taxonomy. That really what that is our attempt to codify some of those findings to be able to start that conversation, provoke it, promote it going forward. It's open source, so it's deliberately a collaborative project. And it kind of goes back to the fuzziness thing that we were talking about before. It's going to be continual definition that'll get applied into this space.
It's almost using AI as the tool to uncover the threats by targeting AI. Is that right?
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, we're no stranger to AI internally. We've been using machine learning, NLP, AI,
AI is all encompassing,
all those
right?
different things.
And we noted on that aspect when we mentioned AI, but
yeah. So what we get to do now is actually attack it, not just use it as Bugcrowd, but actually have the crowd identified that we can deploy into attacking this stuff to make it safer out there in the wild. And in the process of doing that, there's tooling being created. It kind of, the snake bites its tail and it feeds itself in that sense, which is kind of cool. It's a big part of how we've tried to build.
I suppose to finish off the applications, maybe it might be a better terms in terms of if you've not had early wins that you can disclose.
Sure.
Where do you see this being applied? Who would be some of your customers that you'd be talking to in an enterprise?
Yeah, so we've seen a strong amount of interest and pull for this from every major sector, every major industry, right? All of our customers are looking to leverage AI in some way, whether it's, hey, we're worried, the key example Casey gave, we're worried about bias existing in an HR system. We're worried about bias existing in a recruiting system. We're worried about bias existing in the AI that's going to grade your kids' papers at school, right? All of those things inherently have something at risk, right? Whether it's impacting children, whether it's impacting DEI initiatives, whether it's impacting just broader kind of right and wrong in terms of how a system is run and what could be done from a manipulation standpoint. So we're seeing this from a use case standpoint across all of our customers, right? Because they're all struggling with how do we make sure that we have the right level of oversight. Many of our customers are running AI councils, so this is now a piece of their governance work, and they have security governance, they have safety governance, they have usability governance, right? And they're looking at all of those different factors, and this is just yet another solution that they're going to need to think about. And Casey, I think you said it well in terms of you have to have adversarial testing on anything that you're doing now. So this is just a way for them to be able to do that, and it's a way that throughout the hacker community, as a kind of industry or as a community, we can start to demonstrate just the extensibility of what these folks are capable of. We always talk about the creativity, we talk about this amazing talent, but being able to show that now you're not just getting folks in the community that are traditional security people, right? And now it's somebody that may be an English lit major, a philosophy major. You need some of these other skill sets, and you start to diversify what that crowd looks like and bring unique skill sets in, where you can then leverage them for these types of offerings.
I think the analogy I'm thinking of is we term cybersecurity as the brakes. It allows companies to go faster.
Yep.
I think this kind of provides that sort of safety net there that allows companies to deploy AI a bit more with a bit more confidence, but also in more broadly terms.
I love that because sometimes you hear people say security is the seatbelt, but the seatbelt, that's for when you have an accident. Like what we're trying to do here is to prevent that, which is what the brakes are for. So to me, that's going to be. It became very obvious very quickly that this whole area is going to grow like crazy, and haste and speed of deployment is usually the natural enemy of good decision making, and you end up with bad security and safety choices kind of as a consequence of that, right? So how do you provide as much input into the governance aspects of what companies are in the process of building as well, to help them inform like the specific things that they need to improve? Because like half of the market at this point in time is still grappling with the idea of, do we need a chief AI officer? Cool, like that's an important question to answer, but in the meantime they're deploying this stuff out into their production systems like crazy. So like you've got to be able to give input to that at the speed of internet, otherwise you're going to need the seatbelt. And you're still going to need services like an AI bias tool set of Bugcrowd. A chief AI officer is still going to need as much assistance as they possibly can. They can make all the decisions in the world in the correct way, but what about that edge case that's been missed? Like that's the same problem that we've been dealing with this entire time. Even the companies that do traditional AppSec really well, they miss something. There's always another issue to be found, and it's that input that's going to keep this whole thing safe and secure as it goes forward. Well, this is a brand new announcement. It's actually not even live as we are recording this, which is always good. You haven't heard it here first, unfortunately. But Casey Ellis, the Chief Strategy Officer and founder of Bugcrowd, great to have you here in Singapore. And Dave Gerry, the CEO, once again, back to back, Sydney, San Francisco, and now Singapore.
I know, this was the hat trick.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us on MySecurityTV.
Thanks for having us,
guys.